Hello and welcome to Matt's Garage. I'm Matt, this is the garage, and today we're going to talk about how to make tapered cuts. Now, in an earlier video, I introduced you a little bit to my tapering jig. I've actually made some changes to it, so we'll talk about those. And in a video even before that, I introduced you to how I build shaker style tables, which do have legs with tapers on two sides. So now I really want to do a deep dive into how the taper jig works, how I set up the cuts, and then actually go ahead and do a taper cut for you on this nice piece of cherry. So let's get into it. All right, first off, let's take a look at the tapering jig. This is a sled, if you like, for the table saw. It's just a single piece of plywood for the base. There's a couple of channels with some T-tracks in it. And in those channels ride two T-bolts that control the main hold down and angle part. So that's how you get your angle correct. And then the hold down and angle jig, if you like, has a couple of clamps on it. I just recently added these PowerTech hold down toggle clamps. And then it has a slot in the center with a wider slot underneath to also fit a T-bolt that I use these other hold down clamps for. So the basic idea is the jig rides up against your fence, and I already have the fence adjusted for a cut. You want it to just barely kiss or just barely miss the blade. Is it the tiniest bit of touch on the blade? That's fine. This is probably even a little too far away, but it'll be okay. And then you need to get your piece of wood secured to the base. I'm going to show you exactly how I do two things. One is how I mark up the piece of wood to get my taper the way I want it. And two, how I actually position and secure the stock to the tapering jig. So let's do it. Okay, so let's get into the setup. First of all, a little bit about this particular piece of stock. This is a 7/4 cherry. When I do these tapered legs, I typically like to bring the taper from 7/4 down to about 1 3/8. I just find that that looks right. It's a nice look for the types of legs that I build. Of course, for your project, you might have a very different taper. Very different taper. But in any case, you're going to have some starting width and some width that you want your taper to be at. And those are the kinds of measurements and markings you're going to need to do. So how do I do that? Well, first of all, since this happens to be a table, and I'm not doing anything fancy up where the aprons meet the legs, I need a flat square surface on all sides of the legs. So since my aprons tend to be about 3.5 inches wide, when I build the table. Again, that's just a dimension that I've come to over the years building tables. I will put 2 marks approximately 4 inches down from the top of the stock. And this is the part that's not going to get a cut or a taper in it. And that's sort of my starting mark, or if you like, my ending mark, as you'll see when I put it on the tapering jig. I know I don't want the blade to go past that mark. I want to keep this area nice and square so I can, put my dowel holes in it, or if you were doing a mortise and tenon, you could do your cuts. So that's one mark. Then on the other end, I want to make sure I know where my 1 3/8 is. So it's a little hard to see here. I have 2 marks. I have a mark here, and I have a mark on the other side, both 1 3/8 from a good flat surface on the leg. And remember, this leg already has one taper in it, so you have to be a little careful when you're cutting after you cut that first taper to make sure that you're you're moving the leg in the right orientation, so you're not messing yourself up. And so once we have the first taper cut and we want to do a second taper, and again, I have two marks. I have one on one side where a cut is about to be made, and then I have another on the adjacent side where the other cut is going to be made. And so what I typically do is I'll get that mark down on the sled, and I'll make sure that I line it up so that it's just off of the edge of the sled. Remember, the sled is not going to allow me to cut anything that is fully sitting on the sled. So the only thing I care about with that mark is that it keeps this part, the rear part of the stock that I don't want cut, fully on the sled and away from the saw blade. So that's just sort of a guide mark. On the other side, and this is sort of where it gets more important, I'll just loosen up my sled a little bit. I'm just going to use my my tiny T here, which I find very helpful tool, just to transfer this mark onto the bottom of the wood. I don't normally do this, but this will help you see it. So I've got good enough marks there. Here we go. So there's our marks. We have one here, one across the bottom, and then another one right here. In any case, just made this cut. We're going to rotate it clockwise, just 90 degrees. And what that does is it lets this mark be visible to me, and it lets these marks be visible to me. So up at the top of the sled, I am going to position the wood so that the saw kerf is going to just kiss that line. And that looks pretty good right there. And I'm going to do a temporary or initial tighten down of the front, the front hold down on the sled. And then I'm just going to shift it out again so that the rear mark, again, is just on the sled, or just, I can see just a little bit of sled between that line that I cut and that I drew rather, and the sled. So I'm going to do a test mark, test tighten here. And then I'm going to go back up here. And because, I'm moving something at an angle, when you tighten one and move the other and so on and so forth, you do tend to get a little bit of movement. And so I just go back and forth until I like what I see. This looks pretty good right here. I think the blade's just going to cut that. So now I'm confident that I can fully tighten this part of the jig. But of course, the wood's going to move around. It'll be a very dangerous cut. And so that's why we have the hold down clamps. Now, you notice I also have these toggle clamps. For this particular cut, because of the length of the piece of wood, they don't come into play. If I was doing a longer taper cut, chances are I'd be using them, as well as using these other hold downs. I tend to send one pointing forward, as you can see here. You don't have to wolf it down, just tight enough so that you feel comfortable that the piece is not going to shift on you while you're running it through the saw. And that feels like it's not going to go anywhere. One thing about how I tend to set these up, and people do this different ways. I don't quite know why people would not do it this way, honestly. I like to put the biggest cut at the front, closest to where I'm initially feeding the wood in, so that by the time I get to the end of the cut, I'm really just pushing a bare sled through and I'm not doing any work with the blade. All else being equal, I want to make sure that I am taking less and less wood off as I push this sled through. Anytime you're using a hold down like this, I don't care what anybody says, that's a dicey cut. Okay, those are scary cuts. Don't fool yourself about it. I trust my sled. I trust what I can do with the sled and with the saw. But I still want to make sure that I'm doing the biggest part of the cut first, and then working my way down to really just a sliver. Because then I can be focusing on keeping the sled square to the fence, guiding it all the way through, getting the saw turned off and hands off. So with that said, let's get another setup done on the saw, and then we're ready to cut. So I mentioned before that this just goes up against the fence, so there it is. Clearly the blade is not high enough for this particular piece of wood, so we'll go down and we'll send the blade up. So the saw is now set up for the cut. I have the roller guide out there so that it'll start to catch the end of the sled as I start to push the sled out. That'll keep the sled nice and square to the table. I've double checked my hold downs. The piece of wood is very secure. I've triple checked that the hold downs won't come anywhere near the blade. They will not. I have a roller stand underneath the back of the sled because it is fairly heavy and it's overhanging quite a bit. And I've got the blade up high enough to clear the wood. We'll just double check that. The wood is just shy of 2 1/4. We'll call it 2 1/8. Top of the blade is at about 2 1/4. So we will make our way through the wood. Like I said, this is not a normal cut. You're using a very complicated jig. You got the blade up high, so keep your wits about you. That's the best advice I can give you on a cut like this. We will use dust collection, even though, again, on this saw, dust collection is not very good. I'm going to make sure I've got nothing that is dangling too far off. So I'm actually going to zip up here. And you probably heard that on the microphone. First jet engine on, then the saw jet engine on, then I'm going to do the cut, and then we'll take it off and see how it looks. Here we go. Contact. Also contact. Okay, I'm not sure if it came through on the video, but the blade was not quite high enough as I made my way through the wood. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go right back through again. So I'm going to raise the blade up just about another 1/8, 3/16 of an inch. Our setup is still good. Let's bring it back through, finish that cut. Contact. Second contact. And much better that time. Let's, with the saw safely off, bring everything back over here. So I like the cut. If we measure the cut, 1 3/8 and 1 3/8. Beautiful. So this would make for a nice cut. Not sure how well you can see it, but there's how close we got to the mark that we made. Not too bad. There's probably could have moved it a little further out, but given that I needed 4 inches there, I've got roughly 5 inches. This, of course, gets a nice sanding so that I smooth out that taper. Your taper's not going to be perfect because it's a round saw blade. It's a square piece of wood. If you wanted an absolutely perfect taper, well, that would be for a different video where I figure out how to build a tapering jig for my bandsaw, and we do it that way. So there you have it. Basic tapering jig. Nothing too fancy about it. As I've mentioned before, and I've shown you in another video, pretty easy setup. Make sure you get your marks and your measurements correct on your stock, and then carefully run it through the saw. I did 2 passes because I'm a human being and I misadjusted the blade initially. That's okay. The setup was the same. It was a safe cut the second time around. And we've got ourselves a nice taper, a little bit of burn marks here, but nothing that sanding wouldn't take care of. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something about it. Now that you know how to build a taper jig, or at least what one looks like, I'm assuming that you could figure out how to build this yourself. There's dozens of videos on actual building of these things. Less on, I think, actually doing the setup and making the cut. Hope this was helpful to you. Please make sure to like this video. Please make sure to subscribe to Matt's Garage. I'd love to keep on bringing you content. And you have a good day in your shop. See you next time.